I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for February the 18th, 2026. Today on our Theology Roundup, we are continuing a multi-part series on one law or one Torah theology. And what is unique about this study is we're actually going into the actual passages in the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, where the terminology one law or one statute appears, so we can have some kind of an understanding regarding what these statements meant in context. And we will be finishing up with the last actual passage today on Numbers 15, 29 to 30. And then the rest of the week and into next week, we will be reviewing some of the ideological, philosophical aspects of one law, one Torah theology, and how I believe, at least, there is a better alternative to it. Simply because, and I've stressed this quite a bit ever since we got started, simply because one may not hold to one law or one Torah theology and be a little critical of its legalism, fundamentalism, and judgmentalism, does not all of a sudden mean that you're telling non-Jewish believers to stop remembering Shabbat or the festivals or a kosher style of diet, etc. But my experience over the years, well over 20 years, in interacting with one law or one Torah people, in particular the ones who are really strident about it, it's not always been very positive. It's been met with a great deal of tension. And to be honest, many of them are unwilling to go back in and say, did I quote one law for the native and sojourner correctly? Because each of these statements appears in some kind of an ancient context. And the arbiter of truth is, of course, the biblical text. Now, we're going to conclude with the passages today, Numbers 15, 29 to 30. Tomorrow, just to give you a little preview, we'll be getting into some of the similarities between native and sojourner in ancient Israel, which is not something you will frequently hear from critics of one law or one Torah theology. So simply because I'm negatively disposed to what has become known as one law, one Torah theology, I consider it legalistic, judgmental. As I said, I've had many problems over the years with some of its people. Native and sojourners still in ancient Israel had far more in common than not. We need to learn how to focus on common elements of faith in today's Messianic community. And we need to be very welcoming in of non-Jewish believers whom the Lord has supernaturally directed into this faith community in these end times. So we're going to be continuing through the rest of this week and into next week with this subject. It's all cumulative, and please be sure to keep that in mind. All right, so if you will, please go to the Messianic Apologetics website, messianicapologetics.net. Click on the Articles tab, go down to the letter O, and here you see Approaching One Law Controversies, Sorting Through the Legalism. That is the main article we've been going through in this series. You can click there, and then a PDF file will open up. And that's where we left off yesterday with Numbers 15, 29, and 30. All right, Numbers 15, 29, and 30. You shall have one law for him who does anything unintentionally, for him who is native among the sons of Israel, and for the alien who sojourns among them. But the person who does anything defiantly, whether he is native or an alien, that one is blaspheming the Lord, and that person shall be cut off from among his people. New American Standard. Now, how many of you, and I'm trying to be fair here, but I'm also trying to point something out. How many of you have seen "you shall have one law for him" quoted, and then none of this other stuff quoted? Okay. So much of one law, one Torah theology has been promoted via internet memes, not necessarily via a detailed, systematic study of the scriptures. And again, because we're going to get into this tomorrow, this is not to say that native and sojourner did not have more in common than not. They did have more in common than not, but you still have to reckon with the specific context of what is being detailed here. And you have to then sort through the spiritual dynamics, not just the theological dynamics, but the spiritual dynamics of, is this what you want a faith community to focus its main attention upon? To which I would say no. Okay. The second usage of the terminology "one law," appearing in Numbers chapter 15, occurs after instruction is detailed regarding what to do to cover communal or individual unintentional sin. I had to make a note to myself. The specific example of unintentional sin provided by the text is forgetting to present the first of one's dough to the Lord. Yet, this example is extended out to include all of the other unintentional sins committed by the general population of ancient Israel. A mechanism was in place so that specific offerings, either for the congregation or an individual, could be made before the Lord for restitution. All right, so let's look at Numbers 15, 17 through 18. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, when you enter the land where I bring you, then it shall be that when you eat of the food of the land, you shall lift up an offering to the Lord. Of the first of your dough, you shall lift it up a cake as an offering, as the offering of the threshing floor. So you shall lift it up. From the first of your dough, you shall give to the Lord an offering throughout your generations. But when you unwittingly fail and do not observe all these commandments, which the Lord has spoken to Moses, even all that the Lord has commanded you through Moses, from the day when the Lord gave commandment and onward throughout your generations, then it shall be, if it is done unintentionally, excuse me, without the knowledge of the congregation, that all the congregation shall offer one bull for a burnt offering as a soothing aroma to the Lord, with its grain offering and its drink offering, according to the ordinance, and one male goat for a sin offering. Then the priest shall make atonement for all the congregation of the sons of Israel, and they will be forgiven, for it was an error. And they have brought their offering, an offering by fire to the Lord, and their sin offering before the Lord for their error. So all the congregation of the sons of Israel will be forgiven, with the alien who sojourns among them, for it happened to all the people through error. Also, if one person sins unintentionally, then he shall offer a 1-year-old female goat for a sin offering. The priest shall make atonement before the Lord for the person who goes astray when he sins unintentionally, making atonement for him that he may be forgiven. Numbers 15, 17 through 28, New American Standard. All right. So the statement regarding "you shall have one law for him" is given in a specific context. And how does that apply? How would it have applied for the community of ancient Israel and its jurisprudence? That's what we're trying to sort through here. The most significant part of these directions, to be sure, is how there was a sacrifice available for sin which had been committed unintentionally, Numbers 15, 22, 24, or unwittingly, New Jewish Publication Society version. This concept is represented by the verb shagah and the noun shagaga, and how a sin of this type may result from two causes: negligence or ignorance. Theological Word Book of the Old Testament. When a congregational offering was made for an unintentional sin committed, it would have had a result affecting the entire community of ancient Israel. Numbers 15:26. Both the Bnei Israel, or children of Israel, and the stranger who sojourns among them, Revised Standard Version, or Ger Hagar Betokam. The offense was, in fact, so broad sweeping that Numbers 15:26 made the point to say that Kol Ha'am, or all the people, were affected by it. It is right to recognize that the presence of such a sacrifice was a definite sign of God's grace. Recognizing that committing unintentional sin applied to all within Israel, be the person Ezrach or native, or Ger sojourner, is clear from how the sacrifices offered affected both groups equally. Both the Ezrach, native, or Ger sojourner, were penalized when you unwittingly fail and do not observe all these commandments which the Lord has spoken to Moses, even all that God the Lord has commanded you through Moses from the day when the Lord gave commandment and onward throughout your generations. Numbers 15:22 and 23, New American Standard. While there are specific instructions in the Torah, to be sure, such as those given to the Levitical priesthood or the leaders of Israel, or other classes and subclasses of people, the consequences of not keeping kol hamitzvot for all the instructions applicable to the general population should be recognized as being in view. Both the native and sojourner, the two main groups who composed the general population of ancient Israel, were liable for keeping all the commandments. This would, by necessity, require both the native and sojourner to be educated in the Torah's instruction, as what encompassed unintentional sin for the native would seemingly also have encompassed unintentional sin for the sojourner. Now, we're talking about Torah instruction for the general population. It's also true that when you get into the Torah's jurisprudence, there are specific instructions. If you're a man, if you're a woman, if you're a priest, if you are a farmer, a laborer, etc. So we're talking about instructions applicable to the general population of ancient Israel. We're not talking about, a man being concerned about what to do during his menstrual cycle. That is instruction which obviously would only apply to a woman. We're talking about instruction applicable to the general population. The summarizing remark about Torah Achat, or one law, in Numbers 15:29. And this is where we run into some challenges, because some people are assuming it's talking about universal Torah, whereas there is specific legislation in view. The summarizing remark about Torah Achat, or one law, in Numbers 15:29, specifically concerned the offering up of the animal sacrifices to cover the unintentional sins for both the native-born and sojourner. One and the same law applies to everyone who sins unintentionally, whether he is a native-born Israelite or an alien. New International Version. Torah Achat here detailed how the sojourner did not have to have a larger quantity of sacrifices presented before the Lord in order to receive forgiveness. All right, so you understand that the one law pertains to uniform sacrifice in order to receive forgiveness in ancient Israel. The directions which could have been violated by either the Ezrach or native or Ger sojourner involved more than just forgetting to offer the first of one's dough to the Lord. Numbers 15:18 through 21. It was specified to involve all which Moses had commanded. Numbers 15, 22, and 23. It is reasonable to note that a considerable bulk of the Torah's instructions were not only in view, but would necessarily apply to all within the broad community of ancient Israel. And with this was a sure implication and impetus that all, whether native or sojourner, were to learn to keep as many commandments as they legitimately could. Deuteronomy 31:12. Okay, so the emphasis here is commonality, not difference or distinction. But commonality does not all of a sudden mean exactness. One gets the distinct impression, for a sojourner firmly embedded within the community, that he was widely indistinguishable from the native Israelite in terms of basic overall daily adherence to the Torah. Yet, for a sojourner in ancient Israel, still learning what his instruction was, God's grace was there in an animal sacrifice to cover any inadvertent or unintentional wrongs. Excuse me, covering what were relatively minor infractions, the same as any native who might have also overlooked various commandments. And those who committed wrong were, when it was pointed out, to receive the necessary correction, direction, and strive not to err again. It was likely that in some cases, when unintentional sin was committed, a native Israelite who had heard Moses' teaching his entire life would have more readily remembered it once the sin was pointed out than a sojourner who had joined the community of Israel in later life and steadily adopted adherence to commandments as he was acculturated into it. But the need for the sacrifice to cover unintentional sin was the same, and in the estimation of R.K. Harrison, quote, once again, the principle of impartiality applied where a resident alien had been involved, unquote. To this, Martin Note adds that sojourners, quote, are a part of the whole population, and on this account shared in the guilt incurred by all, and therefore had to be included in the atonement. Even Jacob Milgram has to acknowledge, quote, the ger who commits an inadvertent wrong is equally liable as the citizen to bring the required expiatory sacrifice. Further describing, the implicit reason is that the Holy Land will become polluted by sins committed upon it, be they ritual or ethical, whether by citizen or stranger, unquote. Leviticus 18:24-30. Given the fact that corporate atonement is in view, the common need for all of the community of ancient Israel, whether native or sojourner, male and female, to adhere to and learn from the Torah is apparent. Okay. There was, however, no sacrifice specified for the intentional sin of anyone. Okay, this is where we have to sort through some of the spiritual dynamics here. While the Ezrock or native and Ger sojourner in ancient Israel could be cleared of unintentional sin via an offering, if the same persons blatantly disregarded the law and word of God, bayad ramah, or with a high hand, Numbers 15:30 Revised Standard Version, then this would incur the consequence of being cut off and having to bear the guilt of sin. Okay. But the person who does anything defiantly, whether he is native or an alien, min ha-izrach umin hager, that one is blaspheming the Lord, and that person shall be cut off from among his people. Because he has despised the word of the Lord and has broken his commandment, that person shall be completely cut off. His guilt will be on him. Numbers 15:30 and 31, New American Standard. Deliberate dereliction from keeping God's Torah was considered to be blaspheming, reviling, Revised Standard Version, or affronting, New Revised Standard, him. The consequence of this was V'nikrata hanefesh hahiv mekerev ama. That person shall be cut off from among his people. Art Scroll Tanakh. Not only did the native born of Israel face a cutting off, but so did the sojourner. A sin such as blasphemy, idolatry, or some other grave affront to the sanctity of the Lord and his holiness was in view here. What did the penalty of karat really involve? There is an array of potential uses of this verb, as in addition to the literal meaning of this root, to cut off, Exodus 4:25, 1 Samuel 5:4, and to cut down, a woodcutter, in Isaiah 14:8, there is the metaphorical meaning to root out, eliminate, remove, excommunicate, or destroy by a violent act of man or nature. Theological Word Book of the Old Testament. The verb karat might be vague at times, given that it has a variety of potential applications, but the penalty for intentional sin against the Lord was most likely capital punishment. If karat was not intended to be capital punishment, though, and is instead exile, then, as Dennis T. Olson adequately describes, how it, quote, was considered a kind of death itself, unquote. Thomas Dozeman observations are also useful to keep in mind. Quote, the exact meaning of this phrase is not clear. It may have a collective sense, meaning a family line is discontinued. This meaning would qualify the more individual focus of 14:26-38. But it may also be more individual in its meaning, in which case it would signify a loss of status, excommunication, death, or even a judgment by God after death. The bad report of the land by the leaders of Israel, who die instantly, and the murmuring of the people, who are condemned to die in the wilderness, are instances of premeditated transgression that fall under the final category, unquote. Those who were cut off for intentional sins against the Lord were cut off regardless of their bloodline. The Ezrach native and Ger sojourner within ancient Israel stood equally accountable before Moses' teaching, Numbers 15:22. While sojourners who had once acknowledged foreign gods could be more apt to rebel against the Lord, there could likely have been sojourners who were more faithful to him than various native Israelites who were lured by sin. So here, what we see in this passage is we're trying to deal with atonement, dealing with the intentional, unintentional sins of the people. That's what one law is concerned about. Is it speaking of universal Torah, or is one law concerned about uniform dealing with the sins of the people? Which, of course, resultant from the people disobeying the general instructions of God's Torah. Okay, now listen very carefully, please. It is not uncommon to see Numbers 15:29 quoted by supporters of a one law or one Torah theology. You shall have one law for him who is native among the people of Israel, and for the stranger who sojourns among them. English Standard Version. However, is this really the appropriate passage to stress God's people studying the Torah or embracing a Sabbath rest, remembering the appointed times, or eating a kosher style of diet? Things which are being witnessed today among non-Jewish believers being called into the Messianic movement. The stress of Numbers 15:29 and 30 and Torah Echat, this is the specific context, was having to offer animal sacrifices for unintentional sins. The same law applies to everyone who sins unintentionally. Numbers 15:29, today's New International Version. Excuse me. And how those who committed intentional sins against the Lord would suffer a cutting off, Numbers 15, verse 30, with no sacrifice available. This is how important it is to, read what the specific context of the one law passages meant. All right, now we're going to close up with this. What is most significant to recognize from Numbers 15, 29, and 30 is that both the native and sojourner within ancient Israel had a problem with intentional sin for which the Torah provided no remedy. It may be important to recognize that the same sacrifice offered restitution equally for the native and sojourner regarding their unintentional sin. But it is far more important to recognize how only the Messiah to come would be able, by the sacrifice of himself, to offer complete redemption and forgiveness for both unintentional and intentional sins. Supporters of a one law or one Torah theology are, to be sure, right to emphasize that that God's people today need to be educated in the principles of Moses' teaching. Okay? I agree with them on that. We should pay attention to what is stated in Numbers 15, 29 to 30. But what we should never do is focus our constant spiritual attention around Numbers 15, 29, and 30, as though people living in the post-resurrection era have no access to a sacrifice which can cover unintentional sin. Such a sacrifice has been provided in the completed work of Yeshua the Messiah, and mature believers in him should be able to move beyond some of the negative spiritual dynamics represented by Numbers 15, 17, and 30. The one law of Numbers 15, 29 to 30 involved sacrifice for unintentional sin. What are we going to do about the unintentional sin? And yes, it would have resulted from disobedience to the Torah's instruction for the general population. But what is not specified here is what kind of a sacrifice is there for intentional sin. The penalty for intentional sin here is karat. It's being cut off, whether that was capital punishment or exile or perhaps the loss of one's progeny, something like that. That can only come via the completed work of Yeshua the Messiah on the tree of sacrifice. And indeed, what kind of spiritual dynamics do you invoke when, one law for the native and sojourner, when actually you're invoking, uniform sacrifices for unintentional sin, but the Torah itself offers no sacrifice for intentional sin? It's not difficult for a spiritually astute person when you have one law or one statute which pertain to a pre-resurrection era vantage point. Why there's problems of legalism and judgmentalism and condemnation and all kinds of negativity seen in far too much of the one law, one Torah sub-movement. It's not difficult. What's the most important thing to you? One law for the native and sojourner, or what he has done for us, what Yeshua has done for us? So tomorrow, as we will continue in the study, we will be addressing similarities between the native and sojourner in ancient Israel. So much of our study has been spent going through these different passages, which use one law or one statute, and understanding their context and understanding where, at least I believe, those who stridently identify with a one law or one Torah theology have missed some of it. But at the same time, while we have to also navigate, certain sectors of the Messianic Jewish community overemphasizing differences, overemphasizing distinctions, native and sojourner in ancient Israel did have a lot in common. And that is what we need to be focusing on as believers today. So we're going to be going into some of that tomorrow. That's not an aspect of this discussion which gets enough attention. And if you are the kind of Bible reader, the kind of interpreter who thrives on some of those third and fourth and fifth alternatives, which you often don't hear about, but you believe that's where the Lord genuinely tends to move, you'll do just fine with this study. You'll do just fine. If you believe it's either the one law, one Torah movement's way and or the hard shell bilateral ecclesiology way, you're not going to do that well. All right, let's move on now to our news roundup, because right now, throughout the evening, yesterday, throughout the night, right now, tensions are definitely building in our world. What is going to take place regarding the Iranian situation? I mean, there are people right now, we don't want to be presumptuous, but I mean, they're expecting a conflict, a major conflict to break out in the next few days, certainly within the next few weeks. It does not escape our notice that we're only several weeks away from Purim, the Festival of Lots. Of course, when we remember when God saved the Jewish people from annihilation at the hands of the evil Haman, the Jewish people in the Persian Empire. So it would be kind of interesting if a conflict in Iran takes place in and around the season of Purim. But of course, it can happen whenever. I mean, I don't hold the Lord to that kind of a specificity. But we are paying attention to the Iranian situation. Tensions are building, and there's a lot of information, a lot of rumor, a lot of guessing occurring right now. And people are definitely on edge. It's our job to pay attention to what is occurring and be able to offer, should there be some drama take place, to be able to offer solace, to be able to calm people down who have not been paying attention. And so when there's that big dramatic point event, oh my God, what's happening? Holy shit, what am I going to do? We're there to say, look, we've been tracking events for a number of weeks, a number of months now. It's going to be okay. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people I know who are not paying attention. That's why last year we started doing the news roundup. All right, so we do the news roundup after the theology roundup because the news is time sensitive. It changes from day to day. Number one, please be praying for peace, Israel, Gaza, the Middle East, the Iranian situation. Number two, peace, Russia and Ukraine. And number three, reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front. And that also includes what's taking place in the Western Hemisphere and all of that, and in the religious world for certain. Okay, all the stories we're about to go through, these are things which you will see archived later today when this episode is posted on MessianicApologetics.net. Okay, our first story, this is from End Time Headlines, yesterday, the 17th of February. This is the End Time Headline podcast. For clarity, yes, this is a pre-trib thing, but we're not here to go after them for their rapture position. We're seeing what they're talking about regarding how Trump is building the infrastructure for the beast system. In this recent discussion I had with Billy Crone, we discussed how Trump and his administration is being used to construct the very infrastructure for the coming beast system. Now, there's a lot of speculation involving what Donald Trump is doing with his America First agenda. Some of the, look, if the United States doesn't do AI, if we don't do artificial intelligence, the Chinese will do it. So we might as well do it. Donald Trump's Board of Peace. What's happening there? There's going to be some developments in the next few days regarding the Board of Peace. Is that a real alternative to the United Nations? Does it just concern Gaza? The Middle East? Is it more localized? A lot of people are talking. Do I believe that Donald Trump is the anti-Messiah, antichrist? No. I think he's too old for it myself. That's my opinion. Could we see someone in his sphere of influence enter into that position? Sure. Or someone down the road because of the groundwork which is being laid right now. Sure, we could absolutely see that. But we need to keep tabs on what people are saying, what people are speculating about. The Trump term still has 3 years left. a little less than 3 years left. So we're going to see a lot of new developments. We're going to see a lot of very unorthodox things take place in terms of the American presidency. So please do keep that in mind. All right. So our next story, this is from Open Source Intel Defender yesterday, posted 2:26 p.m. So this would have been after we finished yesterday. U.S.-Iranian indirect talks in Geneva have just concluded, according to Fox's News' Trey Yinks. Similar statements, as have been heard before, were made by a U.S. official with knowledge on the matter to Fox News, saying progress was made, but there are still a lot of details to discuss. And here we hear about the Iranians wanting to come back in 2 weeks. Now, the growing, I'm going to use this term very carefully because we know things can change very quickly, but I think the growing consensus is the talks in Geneva really didn't go anywhere. The Iranian regime, the Islamic Republic, they're trying to buy themselves time right now. And, we're here. There are various whispers out there that President Trump has had it. He's reached a point that he's ready to go in with some kind of military action. Now, of course, we could all be wrong. These could all be rumors, speculation, guessing. And instead, we're seeing, there are all these different options available, and Trump won't go in with military action until all of the U.S. assets are in place. So right now, on different social media platforms, online platforms, people are very closely watching the progress of the USS Gerald R. Ford task group, which is now in the Mediterranean. They went through the Strait of Gibraltar. It's going to take a few days for them to reach the Eastern Mediterranean and the proverbial theater of combat. But yeah, these are things people are very concerned about right now. There are people right now, they think that within the next few days, by the weekend, we could see some kind of activity taking place. I don't want to be presumptuous. I don't know. But there are other reports I've seen. If you're planning on flying on an aircraft this weekend, don't. But hey, we just have to wait. We know the situation is tense. All right, from Open Source Intel Defender also, and this is a 1 minute, 17-second clip. That's Vice President Vance. This is from 249. Speaking early on Fox News, Vice President J.D. Vance said that, in some ways, today's nuclear talks with Iran in Geneva went well, but that the Iranians are not yet willing to acknowledge and work through certain red lines set by President Trump, adding that the president would prefer diplomacy, but that other options are on the table for Iran. Indeed. Moderation suggests that right now, even though there's a lot of guessing, a lot of speculation, well, as soon as the Ford ends up in the area, all hell's going to break loose. I mean, they're those kinds of people. The president wants to have the maximum array of options at his disposal, whether that concerns diplomacy. Hey, we're going to go through the motions. We're going to see if they're really serious, or hey, I'm tired of talking. Let's go. So there are a lot of people right now. They're talking. They're wondering. We need to keep tabs on this. And we need to be prepared that should there be dramatic action in the not too distant future, then how are we going to offer solace to people, a degree of comfort to people who were not paying attention? Okay, from Open Source Intel, let's switch gears to Russia, Ukraine. This was posted yesterday, 3 o'clock. The Ukrainian people would reject a peace deal that involves Ukraine unilaterally withdrawing from the eastern Donbas region and turning it over to Russia. We don't know how sincere or insincere, the Russian and Ukrainian negotiators are at this point. I understand Zelensky, Ukraine is not just going to pull out of the Donbas region. I understand him. One of the thoughts is that if there is a peace agreement which involves exchange of territories, it's going to have to be voted on in a referendum by the Ukrainians. There's also talk about when is Ukraine going to have a decent election? Is Russia going to have a decent election? I mean, there's all this kind of stuff that circulates out there. just pray for peace between Russia and Ukraine, because uh, with Russia, we are dealing with the world's largest nuclear power, and with Ukraine, the world's second largest Messianic Jewish community is in Ukraine, and the third largest is likely in Russia. It's ultimately the believers who are going to have to suffer through the decisions of their leaders. But this is not end time specific. This is wars and rumors of wars. All right. All right. The cosmic matters out there. This is from the New York Post yesterday, the 17th of February. NASA scientist warns there's no way to stop thousands of city-killing asteroids from striking Earth. It keeps me up at night. She's worried about the apocalypse. A planetary defense expert is warning that humanity is defenseless against up to 15,000 undetected near-Earth asteroids that have the potential to take out a city. Now, of course, when people ask me, John, why are you so concerned about the greater universe, the solar system? Yes, there are the questions of how vast is the universe, how marvelous it is, its many wonders. But how many people actually sit around wondering, sooner or later, something is going to go undetected and it's going to hit, well, hopefully it's going to hit a deserted area. It's going to hit the ocean, and there's not going to be that much. But these are the kinds of things which I know people tie to various interpretations of prophecy, whether it's, mass numbers of people dying, the sun is moon turned into blood, the sun has grown dark, the moon into blood, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. The point is, these are the kinds of things which I think we do need to be paying attention to more. I mean, one of the reasons why we have a space program and why people hopefully in March will go to the moon is so we can, as a human civilization, as a human species, have the right defenses in place for a potential disaster where an asteroid might hit a city. I mean, one of the good things which could be used for nuclear weapons is not point at each other. U.S. at Russia, Russia at the U.S., China at the U.S. Would be to point it outward. So if one of these things got too close to Earth, we could have a probable defense. But the space, the universe, the cosmos, they've always intrigued me. And indeed, these are the kinds of things, yes, people do tie it into prophecy, but what would be a constructive, useful way to have nuclear weapons? Point it at these kinds of rocks. Don't point it at each other, because everyone is affected by a potential asteroid hitting the planet. Everyone. These kinds of objects don't respect national or regional borders. Okay, from Open Source Intel Defender yesterday, 4:33 p.m. We are currently witnessing the largest aerial buildup of combat capabilities by the U.S. Air Force in Europe and the Middle East since the Gulf War, though we still have to wait and see if this is enough to light the fire under and pressure a new nuclear deal with Iran. So this is his commentary on what's happening. It is true. We have not seen this kind of military buildup in the region since previous major conflicts. So you can go back to the 2003 Iraq War, 1991 Gulf War. So this is major. And of course, having not one, but almost two aircraft carrier task groups in the region, that is huge. When people say a third of the United States active Navy is going to be in the region, that's huge. So yes, all of us would love it if the Ayatollah and the Islamic Republic woke up one day and saw reason and said, hey, it's over, people. Let's try to cut a deal with the United States so most of us can go into exile and we can have money, we can take our families, and we don't have to be taken out by special forces or some kind of Tomahawk missile or the Israelis or whatever, and just turn the country over to the people who really don't want us anymore. That's not very probable. I'm sure we'd love to see it happen. It's not very probable. With that in mind, because we mostly get to hear things from the US side, the Israeli side. Here was a post on social media yesterday from the channel Comedy Media, 4:16 p.m. And when I saw this, I got to be honest, I literally said to myself, what in the F do they think they are doing? Who in the F do they think they are? On Battlestar Galactica, the pronunciation would be frack. Okay, but here you see a weapon more dangerous than a warship. And here you have what is depicted as the USS Gerald R. Ford at the bottom of the ocean. And the Iranian regime, the Islamic Republic, is basically claiming, yeah, we've got weapons in our arsenal which can sink the most advanced aircraft carrier sailing the seas today. Okay. This is the kind of thing which is only going to get the US president upset and get him to want to go after these people, not let's cut a deal. All right, from 2C TV yesterday, and this is from 6:45 p.m. There's a 1-minute 50-second clip. The Islamic Republic of Iran state media claims the IRGC is transferring large quantities of anti-ship missiles to the Persian Gulf. If escalation comes, the regime is unlikely to target U.S. carriers directly. Its playbook is long focused on overwhelming Israel or striking regional bases to force a pause. But this time, the defenses are layered. U.S., Israeli, and allied forces are already in position. Okay, so, of course, Tusi, he's in London. He is Iranian, and he's talking about how the strategy really isn't to go after U.S. naval forces. It's to go after bases in the region, force a pause. Okay, that's just, of course, an opinion and an analysis. We have to wait and see. All right. Let me fix. Got to write a note to myself. All right. All right, so some of you all have doubtlessly seen this circulate on social media or in the news. This is from the New York Post yesterday. Air Force presidential fleet being transformed into Trump's signature red, gold, and blue color scheme. So some of you, when you've seen the president, the Oval Office, that is a depiction of a future Air Force One in a different color scheme. It's not the light blue scheme, which goes back to the Kennedy administration. That's what Jackie Kennedy put together. There are some planes which are being repainted in this preferred scheme of the president. Now, look, the president, the administration, just like they can redecorate the Oval Office, redecorate the White House, whether you like it or not, they can do this kind of stuff. They can see that the presidential fleet gets repainted in a more modern livery, something which is a little better or a little whatever they think is better. I saw some commentary on this earlier today, and one of the interjections was, and I don't want to get too into this, but one of the interjections is that the light blue color scheme of Air Force One or the presidential fleet, because any aircraft that the president is flying on is Air Force One, whether it's the 747 derivative, the 757 derivative, or it could be a cargo jet for all we know. The light blue color scheme is being changed to this other color scheme because what major world organization has light blue as their major color scheme? It's the United Nations. And so some have taken this as an indication that the president's wanting to, not necessarily break, but really distance the United States from the United Nations, especially with his Board of Peace, and this is a real clear way to do so. Get the light blue off of Air Force One. Okay, that's just speculation. I am a little more concerned about the age of some of these aircraft, and we need new aircraft for the leader of the free world. Whether they're painted light blue or dark blue doesn't really matter to me in the long run. Okay, here's a story which very important to pass on, mainly because it had to do with Christian nationalism in America, which wants to see, not all of it, but some of it wants to see mosques, synagogues, other religions, other houses of worship removed from the land, and people who are not Christian pushed out of the United States. And while I understand a lot of the concern with Islamicization, which Christian nationalism has, because a lot of people are concerned with that, not necessarily your Muslim neighbor practicing his or her faith, but some of the radical Islamic things which we see. Along with that, many in Christian nationalism are promoting the idea that America is exclusively a Christian country and Jews need to go too. Okay. Well, the Jerusalem Post magazine, especially we just remembered President's Day here in the United States, sent this post out. And this is very important for us to remember. George Washington promised Jews religious freedom before the Constitution. And here, a 1790 letter from George Washington to Newport's, that's Rhode Island, Jewish congregation declared religious liberty an inherent right, not mere toleration. So you can go through this post and you can see things about George Washington, of course, first president of the United States, lost and found in a basement. The original letter disappeared for years. After a journalist-led search, it was found unprotected in a basement. Now, the conclusion of Jonathan Sarna says in today's climate, shaped by Christian nationalism, the letter stands as a foundational proof text for pluralism. Now, we need to be more specific. George Washington wrote, may the children of the stock of Abraham sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall not be none to make him afraid. And of course, the president was specifically speaking of, the future president, I should say, was speaking of that Jewish people had a place in the United States of America to feel safe and to practice their faith. Now, many people will take that by extension that everything should be tolerated by every single religion. Generally speaking, in an open society, many things can be tolerated, provided you do not advocate violence and harm one group to another. And that's where we get it. We're very concerned about Islamicization. And there are many Muslims who are concerned about that as well. But the argument of Christian nationalism that the United States of America is solely a Christian nation and we shouldn't even tolerate the presence of Jews here, that's not supportable by this George Washington letter. Okay, let's go back to the Middle East now. From Visegrad 24, posted today, 3:31 a.m., Russia, China, and Iran have deployed naval vessels for joint exercises in the Strait of Hormuz, Putin's aide Nikolai Patrushev said on Tuesday. So, right now there are some naval exercises taking place. The Strait of Hormuz, you've seen the map. That is all naval vessels, whether they are military or civilian. They're going into the Persian Gulf. They have to transverse the Strait of Hormuz. 1/5 of all the world's energy goes through the Strait of Hormuz. So 1/5 of all the world's oil and gas goes through that. And as I've seen some people comment, all this, military activity, all this buildup of military forces, not just the U.S. Navy, it's the Air Force as well. They're not just intended to sit in some of these bases for the next few months, waiting to see what Iran might do or not do. So, yeah, tensions are building. People are concerned. They should be concerned. And we will wait and see. Okay. Um, Visegrad 24, this is Russia, Ukraine, posted this morning, 4:07 a.m. The second day of negotiations between Ukraine, the United States, and Russia in Geneva has ended. Both the political and military groups wrapped up their consultations. In total, the talks lasted about 2 hours. Russian negotiator Vladimir Bedinsky described the discussions as difficult but businesslike, adding that a new meeting will take place in the near future. All right, so um, I think reality is hopefully beginning to set in for the Russians and the Ukrainians, recognizing that this conflict, which has lasted for 4 years, cannot go on indefinitely. The Ukrainians are not going to be able to fight down to the last man. They're just not going to be able to do so. That's not realistic. That's not something which certainly any of us should be supportive of. There has to come to some kind of a conclusion regarding this. It's not going to be easy by any means, but we do pray for peace, Russia and Ukraine, and we'll see what transpires in the coming days. All right, so okay, we got 4 more stories to go through, and then we'll conclude. From open source intel, and this is a clip, 1 minute 16 seconds. That is former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. This is a very useful thing to keep in mind, because even if we see regime change in Iran, we see the Islamic Republic overthrown, and we see the exiled crown prince return in some kind of constitutional monarchy or a democratic republic, a liberal republic, that's small L liberal, established, there are going to be other things which are likely to shift around in the Middle East. And so here he's raising the awareness of Turkey is trying to flip Saudi Arabia against us. So that would mean Saudi Arabia inclined toward the United States, the West, and established a hostile Sunni axis that includes nuclear-armed Pakistan. Of course, former Prime Minister Bennett could just be speculating, and that's okay. But you take out the Islamic Republic of Iran, there's always going to be other reshifting that takes place. Each action requires an equal and opposite reaction, as they would say. So what would happen? Turkey, which some people have speculated wants to reestablish the Ottoman sphere of influence. They want to, pull Saudi Arabia in. What about Pakistan? They're nuclear armed. We just have to keep tabs on this. Okay. From the Jerusalem Post, today, the 18th of February, massive weeks-long war between U.S. and Iran could begin very soon, Axios reports. And the byline, the U.S. has been steadily building up its forces within the region. Axios reported that all signs point to Trump pulling the trigger if talks fail. So you can read this article and just consider some of the analysis. But it is true. Tensions are building. I mean, I've seen people, and it's probably rumored, but that Trump is already fed up with the Iranians. He's ready to strike. We don't know. But what we do know is, does the Iranian regime, does the Islamic Republic have a real intention of cutting some kind of special deal with America over its nuclear aspirations, its ballistic missile program, terror proxies, or is it just buying time? Along with that, here's a report from I-24 News English this morning, 5:24 a.m. Trump is closer to a major war with Iran, as a U.S. operation would likely be a large-scale, weeks-long war report. So, yeah, we continue to watch. We continue to wait. We see these kinds of things. We can't just say, oh, it's just a smokescreen. There's going to be a diplomatic solution. They're going to come through at the last minute. If past is prologue, that's not very likely to happen. But as I have repeated multiple times, we don't want to be presumptuous either. I mean, I remember in the mid 1990s, the turn of the millennium, there were a lot of people who were making claims about this and about that, and it's got to happen. And of course, they end up with egg on their face. They end up speaking presumptuously. One of the reasons I took political science as my undergraduate was so I would be able to sort through the data and the noise. I'd be able to sort through, false and uh, inaccurate claims which could be made by different people. And yeah, in this case, we have to be on guard. We have to watch, but we don't want to be presumptuous either. So we know tensions are very high right now. We know something could happen in the immediate future. And do I think this overwhelming buildup of U.S. forces, Air Force, Army, Navy is just so they can just sit there on a Middle Eastern vacation? Of course not. And from Open Source Intel Defender, we're going to have to close with this. This is from 10:15 a.m. this morning. This is commentary. The Trump administration is preparing for a major war with Iran that would likely consist of a massive weeks-long campaign by Israel in the United States that would look more like full-fledged war than last month's pinpoint operation in Venezuela, sources tell Axios. With one Trump advisor stating the boss is getting fed up. Some people around him warn him against going to war with Iran, but I think there's 90% chance we see kinetic action in the next few weeks. Okay, so again, what's going to happen? Just once the Ford task group arrives Eastern Mediterranean within the theater of combat or general theater of combat, yeah, we have to be paying attention to this. And we know that, there's a lot of talk out there. There's a lot of guessing. There's a lot of speculation. The president does have the maximum array of options at his disposal, diplomatic to military. We know that we're seeing a repeat of a lot of the things which occurred last year around the same time, the buildup, which ultimately culminated in the 12-day war. But if regime change is going to occur in Iran, it's going to involve Israel and their regional needs, the United States and their geopolitical needs, not just the Middle East, but also what do we do with Russia? What do we do with China? What do we do with energy? What do we do with that kind of stuff? And then number three, the Iranian people themselves. Are they ready to rise up and take back their country from this theocratic fascist regime? These are the different things which analysts are having to sort through. And we pray that the best option for the people of Iran, for Israel, for the region is indeed sought. Because while I do believe we're likely to see in the coming weeks some giant steps forward toward the return of Yeshua, it's also going to go, as I explained yesterday, it's going to go in, start and stop. It's going to go in waves. It's going to go in, different stages. And we just have to keep that in mind, and we have to be aware of everything. All right, and that concludes our news roundup for today. Now, I wanted to mention this because I was able to catch some of it earlier this morning, and I'm probably going to comment on it tomorrow, and it'll be the last story tomorrow. And that involves, and those of you who are on social media, you know about this, that involves the recent exhibition by Torah Resource at the Southwestern MJAA conference in Irvine, California. Now, Torah Resource is the main, that's Tim Hegg originally. Now, I believe he's passed it off onto his son, Caleb Hegg. They're the main one law or one Torah organization out there. And they were able to exhibit for some reason at the Southwestern MJAA conference. And I caught some of it, what he said about it earlier today, his response to that, his reaction to the MJAA style of Messianic Judaism. And I have a few observations I'd like to make on that tomorrow, and it will probably be the last story. Um, Not so much what they think or not think, but more, why is somebody like me, John McKee, our ministry, Outreach Israel Ministries, Messianic Apologetics, why are we more inclined to the MJAA approach to the Messianic experience than some of the other approaches? So I definitely am using this as a prompt to discuss some of that, because I know somebody is going to want to know what I think. All right. That concludes our news roundup. As always, on behalf of Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for all of our ministry efforts. Please do consider signing up for a monthly $25 or $50 donation. If you have not already, be sure to visit my website, messianicapologetics.net, where you can access a wide array of articles, frequently asked questions entries. You can read back issues of Outreach's Real News. You can take a look at some back episodes of Messianic Insider, different McKee moment shorts, and generally take a look at our different ministry experiences and adventures over the years. And please do be sure to give this episode a thumbs up or a heart. It'll help our exposure on social media. We will see you again tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, shalom, and take care.